Hello, it's Andrew. Welcome to Collab Learning. Today's special is the rise and fall of the German army on the Eastern and Western fronts, Part 4. Red Army Reform and the Birth of Deep Battle. If you like my work, please give me a like, subscribe to this channel, check the playlist, and support me on Patreon and PayPal. Additional links and information can be found in the description box below. And see the sidebar for a list of the best books and sources on the subject. In Parts 1 and Parts 2, we covered the years 1941 and 1942. In Parts 3, we covered the cruel summer of 1943. The German defeat at Kursk in July 1943 marked a turning point in the war on the Eastern Front. Catastrophic damage was inflicted to the German panzer troops and their strongest divisions by subsequent Soviet counteroffensives in that fateful summer. The Axis forces broke their back and the bloody march to Berlin began. In 1 year after Kursk, the German army in Russia shrank by 900,000 men, as reinforcements were greatly outpaced by their losses. By June 1944, Germany would suffer its 6 millionth casualty on the Eastern Front before Army Group Center was destroyed by Operation Barbarossa. For the German army, the extraordinarily high losses they inflicted on the Red Colossus could only slow but not stop it. Historians are still debating the exact figures, but the Soviet Union would suffer up to 29 million military casualties in World War II. The Soviet Union owed their victory to a devastating new and improved Red Army, what the historian David Glantz called the Colossus Reborn. The sudden rollout of the new Red Army was a rude awakening for Axis forces and was not fully understood and foreseen by their generals, including Field Marshal Manstein of Army Group South. German combat units suddenly went from fighting a tactically inferior and often incompetent opponent to a peer adversary in 1943. By July 1st, 1943, the Red Army's combat power was developed as part of a robust and reliable system. This new force was capable of continuous offensive operations by armies and fronts. It would inflict continuous damage, shrug off massive losses of its own, and advance across Europe while denying Germany any strategic initiative for the remainder of World War II. This redesigned and rebuilt Red Army was a product of 2 years of horrifying experience and military failure. The fundamental concept behind the new Red Army was to leverage the Soviet Union's existing strengths, marginalize their weaknesses, and massively reform shortfalls in organizations across the spectrum. The Red Army reform occurred behind the front throughout 1942, with the greatest strides being made half a year before the Battle of Kursk. The new organizations at the front and at the rear increased the size of the Red Army by over 1 million men, leading them to outnumbering German forces 2-1. It started with a reform of the command and control system. This was the result of raising hundreds of new communication battalions and regiments. The Red Army also massively improved coordination with their Air Force by building 240 new air liaison stations to support field armies. The Red Air Force's ground attack ability expanded in size, with hundreds of new ground attack aircraft and bombers. To protect the Red Army's command and control and its lines of communication from mass German ground attack airpower, the Red Army massively expanded their anti-aircraft forces to 48 anti-aircraft divisions and over 300 subunits. This protection was enhanced by expanded fighter aviation. This first leap forward meant that the brain of the Red Army was kept secure from destruction by the German Air Force. At the same time, there was also a manifold expansion of combat engineering, supply, transport, construction, road building, and repair formation. This created a far superior supply and logistics system, which along with robust command and control became the backbone of the Red Army. Red Army combat forces saw dramatic reorganization and expansion as well by the middle of 1943. The Red Army Rifle Division ceased to become a division in the Western sense and shrank to less than 9,000 men. Yet it still retained the same level of equipment, but in a very concentrated form. The small division became a much more maneuverable unit and a heavily armed offensive style unit. A rifle division's key combat power was its pool of 1,500 submachine guns and over 80 direct fire cannons that were dangerous to German armored vehicles and infantry nests alike. The Rifle Corps headquarters became a command center that held a variety of different specialized units like tanks and self-propelled guns. With the new Rifle Corps, the Red Army leveraged the Soviet Union's ability to mobilize vast numbers of men and also its overproduction of artillery pieces. It circumvented the lack of quality training and military education among conscripts and combat formations. It allows soldiers of a relatively low standard of training to generate combat power within heavily armed, rigidly controlled, and ruthless attack patterns that aim to close in with the enemy and seize territory with a vast superiority of cannon and submachine gun fire. Meanwhile, the best trained men of the Red Army could be used to perform armored maneuver warfare in the tank armies, tank corps, and Mechanized Corps. All these armored and mobile forces had undergone a lot of reform and were now near-peer adversaries to the German Panzer Divisions. They made up for their weaknesses in motor vehicles with enormous numbers of tanks and self-propelled guns with rapid replacement and repair of losses. Security for Red Army ground forces was provided by a massive rollout of new anti-tank forces. Over 360 anti-tank brigades and regiments were raised by July 1943. By the end of 1943, the Red Army would have additional 6,700 anti-tank guns in these new formations to help protect the Eastern Front. 30 new self-propelled gun regiments were also raised. These planful anti-tank forces were positioned and moved around by commanders in combined arms defensive operations with mine-laying engineers, artillery, and infantry. Combined with the Red Army's vast tank forces and the oversupply of anti-tank weapons, the Eastern Front was now loaded with tens of thousands of cannons, which completely turned the tables against the German panzer troops. The Eastern Front in 1943 was essentially sealed off against German panzer forces and turned the front line into a dangerous anti-tank obstacle course. At the same time, the revolution in anti-tank security was completed. The Red Army also achieved a revolution in their artillery forces. In 1941, the Red Army artillery was decentralized and spread thin against Operation Barbarossa and Typhoon, and ultimately ineffective. Something had to change, and the change was centralization and concentration for big wins rather than expending artillery strength in day-to-day combat. First, the Red Army conserved their professional artillerymen and trained new ones by decentralization of indirect fire artillery away from the Rifle Division and towards concentration in the Artillery Division for main effort tasks. Medium artillery gun battalions were thus removed from the rifle divisions and pushed up to the corps, army, and front levels, greatly weakening indirect fire available at the divisional level. As a replacement, the rifle division was reinforced with an oversupply of 76mm multi-purpose light artillery that could be used as indirect fire, anti-tank guns, or direct fire. This meant that although the Germans tended to have more effective firepower than the Soviets and inflict far heavier losses, the Red Army could circumvent this by conserving its indirect fire artillery ammunition in day-to-day positional fighting. So if the Germans launched a powerful offensive, the Soviets would have a deep ammunition reserve available to repel them or greatly reduce their gains. This hoarding put the Red Army in a secure state. When the day of decisive offensive came, fronts, armies, and rifle corps would have their ammunition reserve to concentrate extreme superiority in artillery, often 5-1 and even greater. The centralized artillery would launch a massive artillery strike with hundreds or even over 1,000 guns, multiple rocket launcher systems, and heavy mortars. This would turn the German defense in depth into a moonscape and into apocalyptic wastelands. The Red Army could then defeat the Germans and conquer the territory, but usually with extremely high casualties. In the next part of the series, I will cover the systematic way the new Red Army was used in offensive operations, along with the imperfections inherent in the new system. See you there. Please put your thoughts and ideas in the comment section. They always make a great conversation. I hope you find this special to be informative. Thanks for watching.